11th Hour on Radio Sri Lanka, the program that illustrates the rediscovery of the glitz and the glam of the nation's most prominent entertainers and eminent personalities from the corporate sector. Join us
on every Mondays
at 11 a.m. exclusively on Radio Sri Lanka, 97.4 and 97.6 FM island-wide.
Yet another episode of 11th Hour. Businesses need to have good leaders, sector heads and managers to assist the company to achieve the growth route whilst cultivating new skills while maintaining the traditional management skills as well. One of the skills that leaders of today should foster is empathy, since it's vital for a modern workplace to shift toward a person-focused approach as well, because empathy would let you envision yourself experiencing the similar situation, and as a result, an empathetic leader can create an enjoyable working environment for employees. Let's discuss more about enforcing empathy with Mimi Nicklin, best-selling author and founder of the very first empathy platforms, that's Empathy Everywhere. A very good morning to you, Mimi.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Let's get into some serious talking today.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
There is a vivid decline of empathy. Concern and care for others' feelings are virtues we seek to instill in ourselves, yet they are sorely lacking in many adults today. This unempathetic approach, why has it been advanced, causing unpleasantness?
It's a beautiful question to start the show. We're suffering with what we know as an empathy deficit. That is the lack of and decline of empathy. And in fact, it's been widening in our world for 30 years. So we have 3 decades of declining empathy levels. And this has been impacted by many different areas of modern life. Urbanization is one of them. So we now see more people living alone in mega cities around the world than we ever have before. And all of the isms that we see in the world that segregate us, whether that's racism, ageism, sexism, any ism, any segregation that we're seeing out there in the world is creating this chasm, this gap in our empathy. And we're seeing that through many categories, industries and areas of society and life. So this is something that personally I'm focused on trying to fill. But as you said, it has a huge impact on our social structure, on our loneliness levels, on our connection and our ability to collaborate and work together. So it's a very serious issue that in fact has an impact on all areas of our lives.
Is there a particular age group that you have come across that you tend to speak to very often?
Well, my work predominantly sits in the corporate world, as per your introduction there, Sabrina. So I tend to work with leaders, CEOs, C-suite leadership teams and HR teams, talent teams, because we spend 5/7 of our week at work, many of us. So if we can start to change our ability to understand each other in the workplace, the idea is we can spread that beyond there. But of course, working with children and youth is also a critical part of that, because if we're going to rewire the future, reconnect society, overcome some of these gaps, we need to work with the young ones who are going to change the future for us. So that's where my work sits. But in all honesty, this is a human problem. So we could be working with anyone that has a relationship with anybody else.
Since you did mention with regard to the corporate sector, is there a particular industry that you have earmarked where you tend to see this failure?
No, it's actually, unfortunately, totally widespread. This inability to hear each other. We just don't listen well, Sabrina. We teach our children to listen. So when we have small children, you hear, all the time, listen to auntie, listen to mummy, listen to daddy. And then we forget. The children grow up, school, university, and then the workplace. Nobody's teaching this skill set. And listening, empathy, is a skill set. So people often misunderstand what empathy is. They think it's an emotion. It is absolutely categorically not an emotion. Empathy is the ability to perspective take. To do that, you need listening, you need curiosity. These are skill sets that leaders need to connect with their teams, to lead their teams, particularly in turbulent times or changeable times, which the whole world is sitting within today. So That's why we're working with the corporate world, and it's absolutely widespread. So whether that's, medical, tech, education, corporate, FMCG, wherever you look, every business has a need to reconnect their teams and listen to their people.
So you cannot really just pot down to one particular sector or industry. It's not possible.
It's not possible because anywhere that there's human beings, there is the need to connect, right? And as human beings, this is an evolutionary need state. And we've seen that in babies as young as 18 minutes old. As human beings, we need to be seen and heard. We're not meant to be alone. We do better when we're together. So it doesn't matter what category you're in. Having said that, the majority of the data comes out of the medical field and in fact sports as well, where there's lots of teamwork. But the medical industry has a lot more data around the impact of higher levels of empathy on healthcare, on recovery, even on pain levels, in fact, which I wrote about in my book. That when doctor-patient empathy levels are higher, pain decreases. There is also a physiological impact on things like blood glucose, sweat. So this is what I mean. This is not an emotion.
True.
This is a physiological change in the brain which impacts how we feel from a body point of view, our health, and how we perform and do in the workplace.
Excellent. And there are many research showing the statistics that empathy has a genetic component, meaning about half of empathy is found when a baby is born with this genetic component, but then again, with parenting guidance through schools, the community, the environment, the culture, can have an influence on empathy as well. Obviously, we need to dive in deeper. Please explain to us regarding the adaptation towards this empathy.
Absolutely. There is, of course, a genetic part of this. But in all honesty, there are no facets of the human that has zero connection to genetics. So genetics make up everything that we do. Empathy is a skill set that is built into the prefrontal cortex, so it's in your brain, as you said, when you were born. But actually the data's relatively unclear as to the impact of genetics and empathy, but what we do know is it's minor. So social impact is far, far higher, up to about 90%. So when people say, but maybe Mimi, you're just more empathetic than everybody else, I say absolutely not. This is a skill set that can be learnt. You tend to get it from your parents, your society, the people you grow up with, or the people you work with. So yes, there is a connection with genetics, but it is at under 10% of the impact of your total empathy. And in most of those studies, this is self-reported. So also what we know from any social studies that are self-reported, there is also a margin of error. So fundamentally, there is no kind of, let's say, excuse to say, well, someone has more or less empathy than I do. We are all born equal, men and women, by the way, because I often get asked whether women have more empathy than men, and there is no medical data to show that that is true. We are born equal with our empathy. It is an evolutionary skill set to help us survive on the planet. And whilst there is a connection to genetics, the social impact is far, far higher.
Which gender connects faster, though?
Oh, well, that is a big question.
With developing this skill set.
Well, again, I do get asked all the time about this. And what we believe to be true is that women tend to be seen to have higher levels of empathy because they practice it more. And like any skill set, the more you practice, the better you get, right? Whether that's cooking or golf or anything you do, the more you practice, the more natural that becomes. We have seen from a generational impact that women over many generations have used empathy more often because they're living in multi-generation households, because they're pulling together communities and villages, that type of thing. So often women are perceived to listen better or to communicate better in groups. But again, there's no physiological data to say that's true. That's just an assumption that people see out there in the world.
More to dive deeper into this topic with regard to enforcing empathy. We are in conversation with Mimi Nicklin, best-selling author and founder of the very first empathy platforms, that's Empathy Everywhere. Getting back to our questions, Mimi, empathy is the ability when individuals should try and understand others' emotions. This is also one of the core competencies of emotional intelligence and critical leadership skill. How could organizations embrace this transformation?
Absolutely. Fundamentally, we want to move organizations to becoming what I would call a listening-led organization. That means that those leaders are able to hear the people around them. There are no business indicators that don't improve when empathy goes up. So when we have higher levels of empathy, we see higher levels of output, performance, innovation, creativity, motivation, tenure, so the length that people stay in their roles. So it is a deeply researched and very well proven indicator that when organizational empathy is higher, that means understanding in the business is higher amongst different levels, groups, departments, we see all business indicators improve. Fundamentally, the first step to do that is an intention to do so. I always say what you measure manifests. Change starts at the top, always. So we need to see more leadership teams actually embracing an organization that is interested in the opinions of others, that can hear the other generations around them, other mindsets, other opinions. And empathy is not just to understand feelings. In fact, it's far more than that. It's to actually understand perspective. So when someone comes to you with a problem in the workplace, or perhaps a supplier that you've been with for 20 years says they're going to, look for a new partner, empathy is the ability to understand their context, their opinion, and of course then use that to be able to communicate, negotiate, and engage with your workforce, your suppliers, your partners better. So it's an intention-led decision. You can't just sort of hope that empathy goes up in the workplace. It needs to be an intentional decision from leadership to build into that listening-led organization and hear the diverse voices and opinions of people working around you.
Have you come across certain sectors that has not yet looked into the aspect of embracing this important factor which we are discussing with regard to empathy? Because you did mention certain sectors like healthcare, maybe even hospitality and so on. So is there a particular sector that has actually not ventured into this yet?
I would say it's less of a sector per se, which I think is a little too specific for what is actually a very human skill set, but more of a type of organization. So I would say that the more, let's say, established, legacy-led, hierarchical businesses, often, but not always, family-run, or just run by a group of people who have been in their roles for a very long time and are perhaps less open to change. That's not to say that that's unilaterally the case. We see a huge lack of empathy in the tech businesses right now. If any of your listeners have been following the recent firings and changes in some of the really big tech brands, particularly out of the US, with people who are being fired at sort of 5, 6 in the morning without notice after 15 or 16 or 18 years of service, there is a huge empathy deficit, right? So it's not to say that businesses don't make hard decisions. As leaders, we have to, but it's the how you deliver those decisions that makes the difference to both the people that you're impacting and the people that are staying. So as I said, I don't think it's segment specific, although the tech industry is currently famously not doing very well. But perhaps the industries and businesses that are less open to change and that have very, let's say, legacy structures in place, perhaps struggle with that a little bit more.
Definitely, I need to inquire this from you. I just need a simple tip, because I tend to believe that a teacher happens to be an ambassador in a classroom. So how should this teacher, who is in a classroom, spending quite a quality time with a student, how should they be identifying this empathy towards a very a minor, actually, in a classroom? Just a tip.
I would say that the one easiest tip is eye contact. Eyes really are the window to the soul, and I say that because all of us do better when we're connected. So if I were to give one tip to teachers or leaders, I would say if you can make more eye contact when people are speaking to you, to show that you're listening, you will see things significantly shift. The quality of conversation, the relationship, the trust with those people. So it's all in the eyes, Sabrina.
Sabrina Zawar signing off from 11th Hour. 11th Hour on Radio Sri Lanka, the program that illustrates the rediscovery of the glitz and the glam of the nation's most prominent entertainers and eminent personalities from the corporate sector. Join us
on every Mondays
at 11 a.m. exclusively on Radio Sri Lanka, 97.4 and 97.6 FM island-wide.